Hello and welcome. It is 7 o'clock, so it is time to get started with this month's SOFA series. Thank you for those of you who are joining us on Facebook or on Zoom, or perhaps later in the future when you're watching this as a video. To get started, I do want to make a couple of acknowledgements before we get to our special guest. And I want to acknowledge that we are gathered on ancestral lands, Treaty 1 territory, traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. And also to recognize that tomorrow is Orange Shirt Day, which of course is the National Day of Remembrance of victims and survivors of residential schools in Canada. Whether you have tomorrow off or not, I do hope that you have a moment to reflect on Canadian history and all of our role in healing. Now I'm going to get to our special guest. All of our guests are special, but I'm particularly excited about this one because not only is he the president of the Manitoba Federation of Labour, but he is also a good friend. So I'm so glad that Kevin Rebeck is joining us today. Kevin is an expert in all things to do with labor. Is that too much maybe, Kevin? Have I given you too much pressure that you're an expert?
Much, but I like
it. You are here to tell us a little bit about the labor movement, and I think to make the case for, you might be preaching to the choir, but maybe to make the case for why unions are still relevant, why we still need them, and why, you know, it's not enough just to have labor law. We still need to make sure that people are protected. Thank you for joining us tonight, Kevin.
Great to join you. Thanks for having me.
I'm going to turn it over to you because I know that you've got lots of information to share, so the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and thank you all for tuning in, whether it's now or down the road, checking out the video. These are great series, so I encourage you to check them out, and a big thank you to UFCW for hosting these kinds of things. And thanks, Aaron, for the invite. So yeah, I'm Kevin Rebeck. I'm president for the Manitoba Federation of Labour, representing over 120,000 unionized Manitoban workers, and very proud to do so. And I thought I'd talk to you a bit about Labor Day, where did it come from, and what's labor doing today. So that took me down a path to do a little bit of extra research. I know some of that, but I had to dig a little deeper, and I have good people to talk to and lots of resources to look at. And since 1894, the first Monday in September has been a statutory holiday in Canada. Historically, workers used to mark the day with rallies, with parades, with speeches, with games and amateur competitions and picnics. The holiday promoted working class solidarity, and it belonged during a time of rapid industrialization is when it came to be. Since World War II, fewer and fewer people participate in Labor Day activities, but it remains a statutory holiday that many devote to leisure activity with friends or family. So some trace the origins of Labor Day to the 9-hour movement of 1872. We're going way back. In the late 1800s, at the height of the Industrial Revolution, the average worker put in a 12-hour day, 7 days a week, in order to try and make ends meet. It was a time when children as young as 5 or 6 could be found toiling in mills or factories and mines across the country, earning a fraction of their adult counterparts' wages. And what kind of wages did they earn? Well, adults earned on average $1 to $1.50 per day. $1 to $1.50 per 12-hour day is what they were earning. So people of all ages, particularly the very poor and recent immigrants, often faced extremely unsafe working conditions with insufficient access to fresh air, sanitary facilities, breaks. Indigenous people weren't considered people by law at this time, and they often weren't included in the labor force unless there weren't enough white workers and were displaced unfairly. As manufacturing increasingly supplanted agriculture as the wellspring of employment, labor unions, which had first appeared in the late 18th century, started to grow more prominent and more vocal. They began organizing strikes and rallies to protest the poorest working conditions and compel employers to renegotiate hours and pay and other things. In 1872, this is a time when unions were illegal in Canada, which was still operating under some archaic British law that was already abolished in England. What is considered now Canada's first Labor Day event took place. This all started for over 3 years. The Toronto Printers Union had been lobbying its employer for a shorter work week. They were inspired by workers in Hamilton who had begun the movement for the 9-hour workday. That was going to be a big shift and change to only have to do the 9 hours. The Toronto printers threatened to strike if their demands weren't met. And after repeatedly being ignored by their employers, they took the bold action, and on March 25th, 1872, they went out on strike. And Toronto's publishing industry was paralyzed. The printers soon had the support of other workers. On April 14th, a group of 2,000 workers marched through the streets to show solidarity. And by the time they reached Queen's Park in Toronto, their parade had 10,000 participants, or about a tenth of the city's population. The employers were forced to take notice. Led by George Brown, who was a founder of the Toronto Globe and a notable liberal, the publishers retaliated. Brown brought in workers from nearby towns to replace the printers, and he even took legal action to quell the strike and had the strike leaders charged and arrested for criminal conspiracy. Conservative Prime Minister John A. Macdonald was watching the events unfold and quickly saw the political benefit of siding with the workers. I don't see that too often. Macdonald spoke out against Brown's actions at a public demonstration, and he gained the support of workers and embarrassed his liberal rival. Macdonald passed the Trade Union Act, which repealed that outdated British law and decriminalized unions, and the strike leaders were released from jail. So the workers still didn't attain their immediate goal of a shorter work week. In fact, many of them still lost their job. They did, however, discover how to regain the power they lost in the industrialized economy. Their strike proved that workers could gain the attention of their employers, that workers could gain the attention of the public, and most importantly, they could gain the attention of their political leaders if they worked together. The 9-hour movement, as it became known, spread to other Canadian cities, and a shorter work week became the primary demand of union workers in the years that followed the Toronto strike. The parade that was held in support of workers carried over into an annual celebration of worker rights, and it was adopted and copied in cities throughout Canada. The parade demonstrates solidarity with different unions identified by the colorful banners they carried. Labor organizations in New York as well, in 1882, held a convention and started holding celebrations. The American Federation of Labour and the Knights of Labour actively promoted worker celebrations the first Monday of September, and the Canadian chapters of these organizations were doing the same. In a few municipalities like Montreal and others, they declared it a civic holiday in 1889. But as the events grew more popular nationwide, labor organizations pressured government to declare the first Monday in September a statutory holiday. Their impact was significant enough that the Royal Commission on the Relations of Labor and Capital in Canada recommended the federal government establish a Labor Day. And in March and April of 1894, more than 50 labor organizations from Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, Manitoba, and British Columbia petitioned parliamentarians. The groups included several regional trade and labor councils, as well as local assemblies of the Knights of Labor. They based their lobbying movement on similar initiatives from the American unions, and in the House of Commons, a bill sponsored by Prime Minister John Thompson prompted the debate about the holiday's legal status in May of 1894. The House passed and amended the holiday law without major discussion, and it received royal assent on the 23rd of July. The United States federal government, in the wake of the massive unrest of a Pullman railway strike, similarly announced and signed it into law on June 29th of 1894. In Canada, once it was the law federally, the provinces really had no choice but to adapt. For example, in Quebec, parliamentarians announced that the provincial courts would not sit on the first Monday in September that year. And it wasn't until 1899 the province granted that holiday legal status, ordering school boards to delay the start of classes until after the first Monday in September. There were parades and popular celebrations, and Canadians celebrated Labor Day with much ceremony back then. On the 3rd of September in 1894 in Montreal, the city's Trade and Labor Congress played a key role in organizing events for the day. A parade would start at 9 a.m. It guided participants to a park where they held speeches, games, and a picnic. In some regions, instead, they held a mass, followed by entertainment that can include bicycle competitions, foot races, or a lacrosse match. The event served as a forum for unions to voice their demands, but it also helped build working class identity. It allowed time for rest and socializing outside of the workplace. The image of the tradesman and the male breadwinner was front and center in the festivities. Although working women attended and helped organize events by preparing food for participants, they rarely featured in the parade back then. The military-style marching was at odds with the image of respectability imposed upon women at the time. But for a few exceptions, their role was limited to waving at the crowd from floats as wives or ancillary workers, and the absence of unskilled and non-unionized workers also limited the participation of immigrant workers, members of racialized communities, and Indigenous people. The parade was the main event. Depending on the city, it could draw in thousands of participants and spectators, and it became more and more elaborate over time, drawing inspiration from other popular parades. Organizers added floats and marching bands. And around 1950, the Labor Day events and all the hoopla around it started to decline. They began to draw fewer and fewer participants. In Montreal, organizers tried for a time to replace the parade with a performance and ceremonies, but they didn't see much success. There's a few reasons the decline started. The emergence of a leisure and consumer society meant people were more likely to leave town or relax with family than attend a parade. Participation decreased further due to changes in the world of trade unions. Craft unions had traditionally organized the events, but the rise of industrial unionism representing unskilled and semi-skilled workers changed the day's impact and meaning. Not everyone identified with the traditional pride in the trade message repeated during their celebrations. And furthermore, the Cold War divided organized labor into various rival fractions, and this made organizing festivals more difficult. Similarly, in the mid-1970s, International Women's Day, March 8th, became an alternative celebration for feminist unionism. So formal Labor Day celebrations, nevertheless, do continue today alongside informal celebrations. Typically, the Winnipeg Labor Council organizes a parade or picnic on Labor Day, though the pandemic has put a pause on that for the last 2 years. But it is something we're trying to bring back. Encounter of people sitting on their phones and going off with friends and family only, but to draw some more attention to the gains workers have made. So that's a bit of the history of Labor Day. And labor has won many things. We have much to celebrate for, not just for the workers we represent, but for working people as a whole. Going back to our origins, I could say we won things like the 40-hour work week or overtime, the weekend, healthcare, health and safety laws, and much more. But more recently, because people always say, well, that's fine, unions did that way back when, what have you done for me lately? So lately I point to things like paid domestic violence leave, enhancements to the Canada Pension Plan, better maternity and paternity leave, changes to EI to expand eligibility and benefits, things like the CERB and vaccination leave during the pandemic, $10 a day childcare. And we continue to fight. We raise our voices for workers everywhere. We actively call for paid sick days for everyone, not just for those who have a collective agreement and have bargained it, but every worker deserves that. A living wage, likewise. The idea that minimum wage can pay poverty wages is ridiculous and needs to be a thing of the past. But sadly, we haven't moved the political will to make that a reality yet. We want to stop the misclassification of workers that reduces their rights that groups like Uber do, pretending that people are a contract worker that wants to work independently and doesn't want to have set hours or a regular paycheck. It's ludicrous the way that they misclassify people to minimize their rights and pay them less wages. We're fighting for pharmacare for everyone, an important feature of healthcare that never got completed and results in us overpaying for prescription medications more than any industrialized nation in the world. We advocate for strong public services, and we protect the right to strike and the right to free and fair collective bargaining. That was evidenced by our challenge to the illegal, unconstitutional wage freeze legislation of the Pallister government. Manitoba's unions took government to court, and we won. And I'll tell you about that. When we won, it kind of felt like, what did we win here? Because there was no immediate change or impact. And we knew we'd need to return to the bargaining table with a government that was dead set on offering 0.751% for a 4-year time frame. We didn't win that they can no longer offer that. We just won that they couldn't dictate it by law. And it didn't seem like that big a deal. But as we're watching things progress since that happened, we're seeing that it is a huge deal. That groups like UFCW bus drivers went on strike, but they won the right to an arbitration and they won real wages for their members in years that government would have dictated an outcome of 0.751. We saw Manitoba hydro workers do the same, a rotational strike that resulted in them getting to arbitration and winning real gains for their members. We saw the teachers' unions who have a path. They're not allowed to go on strike, but they get a path to arbitration. And we saw awards come to every teacher in Manitoba in every division that were greater than those prescribed outcomes by government. We're seeing some bargaining happening without having to go on strike and without going to arbitration that are resulting in that mandate changing. So that victory that felt a little bit weak at the time is a big deal, because not only does it change the precedent for any other government in the country dictating outcomes through legislation, but it changed the impact in people's pocketbooks, in our members' everyday lives. And that's why we stood up and had that fight for working people, and it's critical and important that we won it. And that really speaks to some of the value of belonging to a union. Not just as a member, but the impact you can have for everyone. Our labor movement in Manitoba is growing closer together and stronger year after year. If there's one thing this Conservative government done is help us realize that together we're stronger. Just like in the workplace when we form a union, our Federation of Labour has been growing stronger. In the last few years, we've gained a lot of affiliates like bricklayers, ironworkers, laborers, WAPSO, Brandon University Faculty Association, Manitoba Nurses Union, Manitoba Teachers Society, MHCP, the Manitoba Association of Healthcare Professionals, and more. And Manitoba's unions are doing that because we know we work well together. We celebrated our 100th anniversary of the 1919 general strike in a big way before the pandemic hit. And there's a number of legacy pieces from that as well. You can visit a beautiful mural, a beautiful piece of art on the side of the Union Center in downtown Winnipeg. You can go on a bike tour to learn about different locations of the strike, or a cemetery tour to visit the graves of some of the leaders from the strike. There's a graphic novel, there's some books, there's a movie that got produced through the efforts of the labor movement in Canada and Manitoba taking the lead. And there's a strong, vibrant labor history that you can learn more of. And there's a number of resources that last beyond our centennial celebration. We took on the Pallister government in that unfair and illegal wage freeze, and I've spoken to that. We've got some of the wins through strike action, and we win things in our collective agreements for our members every day. You know, people sometimes think they're unsure what the benefit of a union is. But I'll tell you, I've yet to meet someone who has a union card, even the most conservative person who grumbles about paying their union dues. If the option was to not have that union there and not have that collective agreement protecting them and to lose those benefits, they don't take that option. They don't actively work to get rid of their union. They may not like the idea of it, but they certainly like the benefits of it. And there are many benefits to being a union member. Unions fight and won a say for workers on the right personal protective equipment during the pandemic. We fought for and won the right for employment standards to change and maintain protections and linkages to workers' jobs if they were laid off for a period of time during these imposed shutdowns. And we regularly bargain for wages, our pensions, our benefits, and so much more for workers every day. We fight for a right to have a voice in the workplace, to instill some democracy in a place that otherwise is just dictated by management. And it allows us to speak with them on equal footing and to bargain and negotiate and work things out in a way that makes things better for working people. So we've been pushing for a number of things. One of our campaigns that you're going to start seeing more information coming out on is the call for paid sick days. In Manitoba and across Canada, about half of workers have no paid sick days whatsoever. And those that have them typically are more well paid. They may have a union or be in the professional field. And those who have less have no benefits and no paid sick days at all. That's not right. If anything, it needs to be the other way. The reality is we all need paid sick days. And if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that people don't need to be put in the position of making that challenging and impossible choice of saying, do I stay home when I'm sick? Or to make ends meet, do I go into work and infect others, get them sick? You know, the idea of a sneezy cook preparing our meals needs to be a thing of the past. That can only happen if we change things. So we're calling on the Manitoba government to implement 10 paid sick days and employment standards with an additional 10 in times of crisis like a pandemic. I have little confidence that this government today is going to rise to the challenge and implement those things, even with the new premier coming on board. But it's something we're going to continue to push for until we can make it a reality. And it may well take us getting rid of this conservative government and putting a government in that's going to listen to and react to the people of Manitoba and what their needs are. So we do need to be engaged and involved. And I guess that brings me to the next step. And that's unions are an avenue for people to have a voice in the workplace, but also beyond. And that means running campaigns where we talk to the public and our members. And it means having those discussions and getting politically engaged and involved. There's far too many voices out there that say, oh, don't talk about politics, it makes people uncomfortable. But talking about politics is the only way we're going to make real change happen. Even getting Labor Day established was about being political and getting the attention of decision makers that can change laws that make a difference to our life every day. And that means being informed. It means finding out where political parties stand on issues. It means getting engaged and involved. It means meeting candidates. And our political system's so small that you can meet local candidates, people who are interested in running, and you can help them in a big way. They need help to run campaigns. And whether that's someone who's comfortable knocking on doors or making phone calls, or people who are interested in doing data entry and putting up signs. But us getting involved is the only way that change happens. Because if we don't, those with wealth and money who make decisions that don't benefit workers have the means to make sure that their campaigns get attention and notice. And when they can convince us that we shouldn't participate politically, you can be damn sure they still are, and they're supporting their candidate who's going to back their vision of what society and norms should be, and those aren't in our interests. So getting involved politically is a part of being a union member and needs to be. It means talking to our coworkers about issues that matter and fighting to make a difference. I know if you're tuning into this, it's because you're a political activist of some kind, or you might not use the phrase political activist. Let me say you're a union activist of some kind. I think those are interchangeable. But being involved means learning more, means tuning into a video like this and others and finding out what people have to say and then reflecting on it. You don't have to take my word for it. Listen to other voices too. Challenge what I'm saying. I think you'll find it to be true. What I'm sharing with you is saying you need to do that research and find people who represent your values. That's why you got involved in unions, because they represented your values. They spoke up for fairness. And there are far too many people that are shy to speak up, so they look for a union representative to speak up for them. Maybe that's how you got involved. A friend or yourself weren't being treated fairly. And then you found out there were a set of rules in place that put you on equal footing with the boss who didn't get all the power and didn't get all the decision-making ability because you had rules that you could apply to make sure people were treated fairly. That's what unions are about. We're about that in the workplace through our collective agreements. But more importantly, I think we're about that in society. One of the few voices that can truly reflect working people's views and visions of what kind of world we want to live in. And more than just represent them, we can fight for them. And we have to fight for them. We fight for them at the bargaining table with our employer. We don't get much for nothing. We have to fight and struggle. We have to go on strike sometimes. We have to march, we have to draw attention and make noise, and we have to do that for laws and politics as well. So there's an important critical piece of being an activist that links all of that together. So I'm hitting the end of my notes actually faster than I anticipated, but I am absolutely very keen to hear some of the questions that folks may have. I'd love to talk with you a bit as well. So if you want to talk more about the politics, if you want to talk more about some of the campaigns that we've been engaged and involved in, if you have questions about what government's doing today, if you want to talk about the conservative leadership, I'm very open to just about any subject area you'd like to go in. And I'll ask Aaron to give me a hand. And if not, I'll start picking some and firing them at you just the same. So you can ask me what you'd like to know, or I can start telling you some more about some of those different aspects.
I do have a few questions for you, and perhaps we'll get a few more coming in now that people know they have a bit of time to chat. But the first one I think is a really interesting point. So they're talking about the fact that we accept that now sort of the 40-hour week, 5 days a week is just like, that's what we do. Why is labor unions not pushing for shorter work weeks? We used to work 14-hour days, now we work 8 days, but it seems like we kind of stalled at 40 hours a week, 5 days a week. Okay, now that's good enough.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm glad it's asked. I think you're right. In North America, we seem to have stalled a bit there, and we aren't pushing for much more than that. That's not true everywhere across the world. There are other regions where labor movement is at the forefront of saying we need to reduce it more. I think the reality is we have been reducing it a bit more, and many of you, when you do the math on your paycheck, may find you're now at 36.25 hours, or we've shrunk some different breaks and whatnot. We still kind of refer to it as a 40-hour work week, but it's not. So some of it isn't us actively saying that we've made that change, but we have been ratcheting that number down slowly. You've also seen different organizations work compressed work weeks where people work a little longer, an extra 15 minutes or half hour throughout the week, and then they get a day off in a 10-day work cycle. So there is some tweaks and changes, but I think you're right. We need to do more than that. We also are trying to wrap our heads around, as a labor movement, how we address folks who are in this gig economy and how we make sure that they have a voice, because for them, they're actually getting a lot more hours in there. They're working far more than 40 hours to try and make things work because they're not in control of their hours, which, by the way, is a main definition of a private contractor, that they're in control of their hours. So clearly they are not private contractors, and they're workers who want and deserve the ability to unionize, organize, and have a say in the workplace. So I think some of it is some apathy that's happened, and people's lack of willingness to get engaged and push their unions to make this a priority, and our disengagement with politics have caused us to lose our voice a bit, to have that impact on broader changes. So we still can bargain things with a set employer where we have a collective agreement. But if we start checking out and disengaging from the political process, our ability to change laws that dictate employment standards or Labor Relation Act issues are really weakened. So it does mean we could make this happen, and we can do it together, but we have to do it together by standing up, by making it a priority, and by taking action and working on it.
You mentioned that, that's kind of the standard in North America, but we read about in Europe that people are going down to 4-day weeks, or they finishing work by 1 o'clock, and their economies are still surviving. So it's possible.
It's absolutely possible. Just like we read about changing hours, we also read about living wages, and that these things are achievable, that just because people who've been listened to say, oh, the sky will fall if that changes, does not make it true. There has been successes in other countries of having all sorts of different work hour schemes, and many of them are getting better and better for workers by having more leisure time. And you'd think with the advance of technology, the fact we can even have this conversation like this means that more changes are coming. And I think the pandemic is going to challenge a lot of employers on what does work life look like going forward. There are a lot of jobs that 3 years ago, if you'd gone to your employer and said, I'd like to work from home and it'll really help with my childcare needs, or it'll help me find my work balance, employers just flat out said no. And then when government said, people can't go to work find a way to have them work from home. And if not, we'll find a way to get some money in their pockets. Employers adapted really quick and found all kinds of ways for people to work from home. And we've been doing it quite well. So I think as we come out of the pandemic, people are going to be making some hard demands on employers about saying, having some flexibility of where I do my work is something I want to have a say in. Those with unions are in a better position to have a voice, advocate, and fight for that.
I think you're absolutely right that the pandemic has made us look a little bit more at work-life balance. And I've been lucky enough to have a boss that has allowed us to work from home and continues to let us, as things are a little bit unsure right now. And yeah, you have a much better work-life balance. Absolutely. If you can throw a load of laundry on at lunchtime, that is great. I know that lots of people don't have that privilege, but it sure is nice if you can. Skipping that 45-minute, hour-long commute makes a difference too. I have a few more questions for you. One is, does labor support a universal basic income? And maybe you could tell people what that is as well.
Sure. So there's a lot of discussion these days about universal basic income. There's a lot of discussion about living wage. There's discussion about how do those things align, or do they align, or are they contradictory? And there are some different ways to define or look at it. The basic concept of a universal income is that everyone gets some amount of money that basically is enough to make ends meet, that you could afford a modest roof over your head, that you can afford the food that you need, that you can afford some form of transportation, that might be a bus pass or what have you. And then the work that you do will provide income over and above that. So that says that if you then go get a job that pays higher wages, that gives you more ability to buy a bigger house, go on more trips, have more leisure time. And if you don't, that you have a baseline, that no one falls below that. And that means everyone is paying their taxes, everyone can contribute to society. And there are some people in our society, due to disabilities, due to all sorts of different reasons, that can't fully engage in the workforce. So this doesn't mean we have a whole bunch of programs for those folks either, that we all have this baseline and then we kind of ratchet the economy up that way. The Manitoba labor movement doesn't have a firm position on that so much as our call for a long time has been that minimum wage needs to move to a living wage. And I grant you that doesn't address then folks who can't fully enter the workforce, and that does mean these other programs either need to exist or this needs to exist in partnership with the universal basic income. But the premise there is that if you work full-time, you're putting in your 40-hour work week or 36 and a quarter or whatever our actual industry average is, you should be able to afford a roof over your head, some form of transportation, enough food to get by, and all of the basic things in life. And it's calculated. The CCPA does Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives does a study every year. They do it community-based, so we would need to figure out how we do a provincial standard for it. But it calculates what's needed, and it's a good practice and one that we need to get to, and we need to fight to get minimum wage to get there. One of the challenges with it is that if government does more programs that provide different supports, sometimes that number fluctuates and comes down a little bit, and then costs and other things rise and it goes up. So it really does need to be clear if we're talking about universal basic income, are we talking about living wage, are we talking about those things together, because that creates a very clear baseline to move from. So there's room there. One of the challenges with the basic universal income is there are some on the far right that say, yeah, let's do that too, which then makes me pause and go, how come they're on board so quick? But they're on board because they think the second we do that, I believe they don't believe the numbers should actually meet the basic tests, and they will dismiss all different public programs that provide supports for people in doing so. So I'm always cautious when people say basic universal income, because I think whose definition and how we implement that really does matter in a big way. And there's the potential for it to harm folks as well. Now, I know for strong advocates who want it, that's not their intent, and they'd be like, well, no, the model needs to be this. But that needs to be a critical part of the conversation. And it's why, as a labor movement, we haven't come on strong on board with it. In theory, it sounds great, but the details really matter. And the details need to be clearly spelled out about what version of a universal basic income would we be supportive of and on board with? And what does that mean for the rest of the different programs that government supports that help people?
I had not actually thought of that. So yeah, we could have a universal basic income, but then if it doesn't also have programs to support, say, a single mom with 4 kids, that basic income doesn't go as far for that person as it would for someone else. Or really, realistically, a basic income isn't going to go as far in Toronto if it's the same one as we see in Winnipeg. That there's a lot to look into it. So it's more than just saying this is great. It's to make sure that we still protect the rest of the network and the support system that's there. Good point. You kind of talked about this before already, but I think we can talk about it in a general sense. Somebody's asking, what is labor or unions' relationship with our government? And I don't know if they mean federal or provincial, but maybe you can talk about both.
Sure, that's a really good question too. So what's labor's position with government? Well, it's pretty multifaceted would be the word I'd use, but let's start with the federal government scheme. That's it. So we've got really 3 main parties. There's, the Bloc is a Quebec-based party, so it's not really an option for most people. And the Greens are growing, and now this PPC thing has popped up. But for a long time in Canada, there was 3 main political parties: Conservatives, Liberals, and New Democrats. Before New Democrats, there was the Canadian Commonwealth Federation. And it shared many of the values that New Democrats have today. And frankly, it was really struggling as a party. And the labor movement was really struggling to push things politically and make a difference. And the CCF, the Canadian Commonwealth Federation, and the CLC, the Canadian Labour Congress, came together and said, we need to do more work together and we should partner up. And they formed what we call the New Democratic Party, which isn't so new anymore. It's been called that for quite some time. We just never made the shift. We've left the new built into the name. And what did that mean? Well, it meant back then that labor institutionally was a part of a political party, that we very actively signed our members up to be part of that party. Back then, there weren't some of the laws that are in place now for political donations that could be done directly by unions. And back then, money flowed from unions directly into political parties to get involved and make differences and fight things. And I think there was a very strong connection and tie. Now that's changed over time. It's still there, but not to the same degree. And laws have changed and said, no, union dues and union money is for union work, and political dues political contributions need to be personal contributions. You can't give from an organization like unions, and unions were in favor of that, and we support that, and that's fine. Just to be clear, we're not trying to skirt the rules or change the rules. We're comfortable with that. But it meant to change our relationship and our work with the party. And it meant we need to lobby, and we need to engage and get involved in a political party if we really want it to still reflect our values. So people do still, many labor leaders like myself, go to the national NDP convention. We bring resolutions that, quite frankly, we copy from the resolutions brought forward at our local union conventions. And we bring those to the party and say, our folks want this. You're going to be you're a viable option to make this happen. Make this happen. Make this your policy. Make this your priority. And I'd like to say we fight hard, but the reality is we're welcomed with open arms. And often the question isn't, oh, I don't know that we can do that. The question is, oh, okay, how do we do that? And what needs to shift to make it happen? Which is a very different dynamic when we go and meet or lobby the Liberals or the Conservatives, because we do that as well. And we lobby, and we don't be discriminatory or shy of who we lobby. We lobby hardest whoever's in power at the time. And we lobby, I would say most frequently, the NDP, because they're the most receptive to what we have to say. And many, many times they adopt what we have to say as their own policy. And sometimes people think it's the other way, that NDP tells unions what to do or what their priorities are. And that's simply not true. Unions often go to the NDP and say, we think you should fight for a living wage for all workers. And then they adopt that as their principle. So at the federal level, there are still a lot of lobbying that goes on. We've got a Liberal minority government again. So I have a very good open discussion, working relationship with Manitoba Liberal MPs. They all know who I am because I meet with them and tell them this is Labor's priorities and things we'd like to see you move on. And they receive what we have to say often to hear us out. They give us a fair hearing, and I think they consider it, but I think often they go and their question isn't how do we make it happen, it's how do we fit that with what we've already kind of decided in the direction we're in. And I think sometimes we soften them up a bit, or we make them go a little bit further on an area, but I don't feel that they wholeheartedly agree or capture what we're fighting for. When the Conservatives are in, again, I know the Conservative MPs in Manitoba, and they certainly know who I am, but they don't always give me the ability to meet with them. They'll meet with me if I live in their riding, but other than that, I don't always get access to them. If I do, it's time limited. They hear what I have to say and they basically thank me for coming. They don't ask many follow-up questions and kind of check off that they met with me, and they negated my ability to say they didn't meet with me, but I never see them championing or moving on the issues that we've raised from the labor movement. So the federal politics are a little bit removed, and fair enough, my purview is the province of Manitoba is my main focus. So the Manitoba NDP and politics in Manitoba are where I spend most of my time. What's our relationship with government in Manitoba? Well, right now, for the first time since Pallister got elected, I can say better, and that's only because there's virtually no relationship. Since Pallister's been elected, the relationship has been very adversarial. One of his first laws that he introduced was making it harder to join unions by eliminating card certification. That's a process that means people don't kind of have to vote twice to have a union in place, and he now gave employers ability to interfere in the process. The law still says they can't interfere, but the worst penalty is a couple $100, and maybe you end up losing a vote that you tinkered with to try to not lose. So there's very little disincentive. But from then on, my ability to meet with the Premier since Pallister was in has been very limited. He put me off for his first 6 months in office, and I cornered him at a meeting of premiers from across the country in Whitehorse to meet with him for the very first time and get a commitment of a meeting when we got back to Winnipeg. And again, I laid out a bunch of priorities and things that were important for us. I was promised that there'd be dialogue and conversation and that we'd work meaningfully together. And then I was swiftly passed off to a finance minister who passed me off to a fellow by the name of John Irving, who consulted with Manitoba's unions, which through a court case we've now learned was a complete and utter sham. And we've proven and called them liars in court that they've never argued or countered, which means that's a legal fact that they are liars. So Pallister's really poisoned the relationship of working people in Manitoba and has broken the trust of unions to be able to deal honestly and openly with this government. He's gone now, yay. I'm very happy to say that. And we will have a new female premier. I'm not sure which one. And there's an opportunity here for them to try to reset the relationship and start back at zero. That doesn't mean it makes it good, but I guess it's better than the negative relationship we've had for now. And I'm hopeful that the new premier won't try and go as hard or be as disrespectful to Manitoba's labor movement between now and the next election. I think they're going to try hard to paint themselves as being different, as being more open and receptive, but I think we'll see them still moving in the same direction, just not quite as quickly. That is a direction that's not good for working people, that reduces our rights, that reduces bargaining outcomes, that means our minimum wage goes up a nickel a year. It's embarrassing that this week on Friday, our minimum wage goes up 5 cents. We're the second lowest in the country, and our government said we should go up by 5 cents. So provincially,
For people who don't know, Kevin, what are other governments doing? How much are they raising the minimum wage? Or historically, what has it been in Manitoba?
Yeah, so that's a fair question. In Alberta, it went up to, when the NDP got in power, they moved their minimum wage up to $15 an hour. And in Ontario, they moved up to 14 with the plan to go to 15 before a Conservative government came in and locked it in at 14. So on either side of us, there's some substantial increases that have occurred. Saskatchewan is the one that's worse than us, but they've had a Conservative government for, I don't know, 20 some odd years and counting now. So that's not a complete surprise that they'd be at the bottom of the pack. But most minimum wage increases are in the kind of 50-cent or more realm, and we're at 5 cents. And institutionally, we're there because they don't even ask what people think a fair minimum wage is. They've dispensed with the pretense of even consulting. And what they've done in law is said that we're not going to talk about it anymore, that it'll be indexed to inflation at best. And without passing a new law, if we feel that inflation amount is too high for employers to pay, our cabinet can freeze it and pause it for employers for a year. So there's nothing there in respect for what workers' needs might be. It's all aimed at catering to employers. And frankly, and I meet with employer counsel and talk with them, even the employer community is a bit embarrassed at where our minimum wage is at, and the fact that there is no set process by which we could even reflect on that or discuss it further.
Well, we're also seeing there's a lot of help wanted signs out in front of a lot of jobs that would be minimum wage jobs. So employers maybe are going to have to make that decision on their own to go to a living wage. It's not going to have to be government forcing them. They're going to need to do that to get workers to stay. So that's almost like workers are sort of organizing, but it's just organizing one person at a time, maybe.
Yeah, it's kind of fun to see them scrambling, and they're certainly trying to change the real dialogue here, right? They're doing, oh, workers are lazy, or oh, workers are on CERB, which by the way ended in November, so no one's on CERB. Some workers are still on EI, but no one's on CERB, so let's dispense with that lie right off the top. But workers, yeah, there's some workers who are on EI that may look at returning to the hospitality industry, so they're making 60% of what they would have normally made on whatever many hours they were worked. And I'll bet you many of them didn't have full-time, full hours. So that's what they're getting on EI, which isn't a lot. And what are they being offered by employers who are trying to lure them back? They're saying, well, there might be another shutdown or not, and I don't need you back full-time, but give up your EI, and I can give you 3 or 4 shifts this week, and maybe some next week, but I'm not sure yet. I only let you know on a week-to-week basis. So your scheduling sucks. I'll pick what hours. You don't get a say in that. So sometimes it'll be weekends, sometimes nights. I don't care if you have child care arrangements or anything like that.
Also have to work 2 jobs, right? Like you're trying to balance 2 jobs and you can't get your schedule in advance. That's impossible.
It's ridiculous, and things need to change. And you're right. Hopefully there will start to be some recognition that they need to offer better compensation. But in addition to compensation, I think realistic scheduling that gives people 2 or 3 weeks notice of what sort of hours they can work, particularly for folks who are juggling 2 jobs or more, being able to do that matters, and having paid sick days and some of the benefits that many others in the workforce enjoy needs to be part and parcel of that package.
Absolutely. Instead of lowering the bar, we should maybe try to raise the bar instead of, you hear people say often, oh, unions, that people get pensions and I don't get a pension. Well, we all should get one. Let's raise the bar. Let's not lower it. I have a lighter question for you now, and I don't know how much you know about this topic. I have somebody asking if you can tell a little bit about how the movie was made about 1919 and how it came about and how that whole production got started. For folks who don't know, the movie Strike, 1919 Strike, came out 2 years ago, I think.
Came out in 2019, yeah. So there's a local fellow in Winnipeg named Danny Scher. He's a composer. He's never been a union activist, which is kind of amazing because he's very enthralled with labor history, and he comes from the Ukrainian community, which he's very proud of. And he wrote a play called The 1919 General Strike. And he's run that play, and some of that was through union contributions that helped fund it and make it happen. And it's run in a number of different years and iterations. Even did it one year, I think it was for the 75th anniversary of the 1919 General Strike. He did it in front of City Hall where the actual horses had charged people, and he had horses come and do it. And he did it in the round, so people sat around the streets. It was really, really cool performance. I was there for that and proud to be. And and interesting. And he continued to run this play the years that he could and struggled to make that happen. And it wasn't a big money maker, but it was a passion of his. And he wrote the musical score for it. It's a musical play, so it's got a lot of different songs, all written by him. And it's an amazing piece of work. And part of his dream was always, I think they're twofold, and he's done one of the two, and I'm sure he's working on the other. And that was to make it a movie. And he meant like a movie that would be seen in theaters, not just something that was on film that someone could get a copy of, but that was widely available to the public. And his others was to get it to run as a play on Broadway. So Danny embarked on a 10-year mission to turn his play into a movie. He met with the labor movement very early on, and we helped get him in front of the Canadian Labour Congress and national labor leaders. He had private investors come. Canada's unions raised over $1 million towards making that movie happen. Other investors filled in many other millions of dollars to film that movie and make it happen. And it was done in Winnipeg in a number of locations. There were some folks who were extras in the movie. There was a call for a lot of bodies. As you know, some of the scenes have hundreds and hundreds of people in them. But it was quite an incredible process. We got to look at some of that behind the scenes as it happened, and were invited and certainly talked to Danny a lot about what was happening and going on with it. I even had the privilege of going to Washington, where they screened it there to try to build some more support and get people on board from the international unions. And he was successful in getting it in a plan to go to movie theaters, and the pandemic kind of hit. So I don't know if it actually went directly into theaters, but he did get it on major platforms. And I don't think it's Netflix, but I can't remember which one, but it is on
one of the streaming ones.
Yeah, one of the streaming ones that people have. And our contribution from Canada's labor movement, the promise was that after it was done its kind of debut, so after a year of it being widely available, that a copy of that movie, a digital copy, would go to every grade 11 student in Canada. So that is something that will be happening as well as part of our contribution from the labor movement. So it's a very neat movie. It's a musical, and you'll recognize places in Winnipeg, and it's set in Winnipeg. Not only is it filmed in Winnipeg, but in the movie proper, they acknowledge this is Winnipeg. Like sometimes we have movies that are filmed here and we don't get that recognition, but it is. So it's our story. It's all of our story, and we live with the legacy of the outcome of it. So I encourage you.
It's definitely a Manitoba story, but I don't think enough people across Canada realize that the importance of the labor movement and its beginnings here in Manitoba, and how we've always been, kind of a little different, a little bit radical. I have one more question that somebody wanted to talk about, like unions support the NDP, but I think you kind of covered that, and that the unions don't support the NDP. The NDP is sort of formed from unions.
Yeah, maybe just further to that and bringing it back to that Manitoba scheme. I certainly talked about kind of our relationship with this government today, at least with the government and who's in power. Maybe that's unfair to say that's government. Government is everyone who's sitting in the legislature, and there's a part of government, the NDP, that we do have strong ties to. Again, the party doesn't tell us to do anything. They do ask for our support sometimes, or engage in conversations with us, and they certainly ask questions and challenge when we say, oh, a living wage is fair. They're like, well, let's talk that through and convince me, and we do, and we work hard to do so. But formally, we do have some relationships, and that means we have a meeting with them a couple of times a year, where we very openly meet with the full caucus. It's not just a leader, it's not just myself meeting with Wab Canoe and us privately having a conversation. It's the full caucus and the leadership of the labor movement in Manitoba. We put items for discussion on the table, some that are tough and challenging for us to have because something's happening in the media and labor or the NDP are being criticized or attacked in some way, and we talk honestly about that. We talk about legislative plans and issues that we're fighting for and trying to make change. We lobby them, and we talk about areas where we maybe have a disagreement and we want to problem solve and work stronger together. So it's a healthy, vibrant discussion. Many union members and union leaders do belong to the NDP proper. And like I say, at the convention, they're not only are they leaders of their union, they're leaders on that convention floor. And people respect what they have to say because they know they're not bringing an issue that's just personal to them, but they're bringing forward issues that matter to many, many workers. And that's why labor's voice is often very well respected and listened to, and that we've done our homework. We bring research, we bring the arguments, we say how this could be a reality, we say how you could fund it and how you could make a difference in people's lives and make things better. And it's listened to and responded to positively. So I know some people are, well, I'm not sure what political party I stand for, and that's fine. I used to be that way too. In fact, I became the chair of CUPE's Provincial Political Action Committee, and someone was like, oh, here's your NDP membership, please sign here, and it costs this much. And I was like, whoa, 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 not so fast. And I did a bunch of work, and after 2 months of doing a bunch of research, I came back, where's that NDP book again? Because I'm ready to sign it now, because it is the party that reflects my values and that I know my values will be heard and echoed in. So it's not a blind trust thing, it's a relationship, and relationships need to be worked at and invested in. And if labor is going to work and invest in it, which we have and we continue to do, that pays dividends in both directions. And I encourage others, if you think a party's failing on an issue or not moving far enough, the easiest way to make a difference is belong to it and raise your concerns. And if you don't think it's the NDP, try the other one, see how that goes. I've done some looking into, and I don't think many of the things we as workers stand for will be as well received as they are at an NDP convention, but try it. I want people to vote. I want them to do it with full knowledge, and I want them to do it with groups that reflect their values. I have confidence for me. My values are reflected in the NDP, and I think as individuals do their research, many union activists will find the same.
You were talking about the fact that when labor leaders speak, people listen because they represent a lot of people. So you are the president of the Manitoba Federation of Labour. That's an umbrella organization that has lots of unions, not every union, but lots of unions in there. Do you know about how many workers you actually are speaking for when you speak up, Kevin?
Yeah, so we have over 38 and counting. I think maybe it's closer to 40 now affiliate unions, and the combined membership of that is over 120,000 working Manitobans now. So it's a huge amount of the workforce. There are very few unions who don't belong yet, and even the ones that don't belong, we reach out to and have working relationships with, and we consult and make sure that we're reflecting their views too, which is why in the last year we've seen over 20,000 workers join the Federation.
Wow, that is fantastic. We have got to 8 o'clock now. I want to thank you so much for your time. And I hope that you've got some people excited about the union movement, maybe some people who are watching who actually are working at a place that's not unionized. I would encourage them to look into UFCW. We like to do things for our members like this. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's really been a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for listening. Please call your local union, visit our web pages, visit mfl.ca to learn more and get involved. It makes a difference.
Well, we always like to tell folks that if you've been watching this and you thought that some of the things that we're doing is interesting, then you can always head over to our website. It's ufcw832.com, and it'll take you to this page that will tell you all about how to join a union. You can call us and just talk about it. It doesn't commit you to anything. If you just have some questions, you're welcome to do that. So don't forget to check out ufcw832.com. And our next SOFA series, which is going to be right before Halloween, we're going to be taking a haunted tour of Halloween. So it won't be exactly the 1919 strike tour. It's going to be the haunted tour, but there may be some crossover in that. So thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you especially Kevin for joining us tonight. Have a great evening, everyone.